The one that stood out that I didn't know about, that I don't think has ever been really talked about before, but apparently in 1999, which the actual film ended up getting made some years later. And it's not a it's not a movie that I really like or care about, but George apparently had reached out to the studio, seeing if there would be any interest in him writing a draft of this screenplay, and it was for Freddy versus Jason. And I was like, what?
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
When there's no more room in hell.
So really the weekend kind of started. I drove up Thursday, got there late Thursday night, and then Friday morning, got up early Friday morning, and met up with Michelle, and we headed down to the Romero archives. And this is the second time that I visited the archives. I think this was her third time, but wanted to go. Like I said, been really wanting to find out more about the early days, late image era stuff. See some some stuff from Jack's wife, Vanilla. I really wanted to see if I could find out more, because I know when Matt was there back in June, he found that piece of paper that had all the like cast and crew members listed for There's Always Vanilla, and it had the what they were making per week, and it had Judy $500 a week, or maybe $250 a week, Ray $250 a week, and then at the bottom it had Dwayne $125 a week. Those were like the three main cast members in there. So the only Dwayne that I know of that could have been associated with that project at that time is Dwayne Jones. But that's the only thing that he saw that had Dwayne Jones attached to that. I've never heard anybody in any interview or anything ever say like, "Oh yeah, Dwayne was originally supposed to play such and such, Michael Dorian or whatever," and There's Always Vanilla. So I was like, I'm gonna go through all this stuff and see if I can find anything else that just remotely mentions. Of course, they had like the budget proposals and stuff like that in this folder where they were trying to sell. Because I think they were originally trying to get $200,000 for There's Always Vanilla, but they only ended up getting like 100,000, I think. So I was just that was a big one. I wanted to see if I could find anything else that would link Dwayne Jones to There's Always Vanilla. No luck. Didn't find any other mention of it. So I don't know. That'll just continue to be a mystery, I guess. If you guys can see. So what Matt was talking about earlier, there's George's latent image binder from back in the day that had like his schedule and his list of contacts and information. It had his calendar. But that was really cool to look through. I mean, just to see, the shooting schedule for There's Always Vanilla was on that calendar of what they were shooting every day. And there was a really cool, so in the budget proposal for There's Always Vanilla originally was called At Play with the Angels. And they had this little booklet put together to try to sell the movie of like, oh, these people are going to be in it. Like, this is what the movie's about. This is what we would do with the money and all that. But I'd never seen this before either. It's just like a little cover page there with Ray and Judy and the At Play with Angels title on it. That stood out. I thought that was pretty cool. So they actually had screenings of Dawn of the Dead back in the day before it came out, like test screenings with audiences, and they actually had the survey there that you could read, and you could read everybody. They would ask, like, would you recommend this movie to your friends? Would you see this movie again? Was this movie too violent? It had all this like questionnaire that they would give to the audience members to fill out after they saw the movie. And of course, it scored high, scores in most things. And of course, some people had comments and stuff, and they would list some of the comments that people would write. There's also a lot of fan mail and stuff from that time period of people that saw the movie that would reach out to George and, hey, love the movie. Can you send me a T-shirt? Stuff like that. So that was really interesting to read, and just to see how people reacted to it and their thoughts on it, back in the day when it first came out. Like, I'm too young to remember that. Like, I wasn't alive when Dawn of the Dead originally came out. So it was interesting reading all of, like, the critiques and what, people thought of it at the time. That was cool to come across. There was a whole folder, like just a folder this thick of, unmade or proposed projects that George was either trying to get off the ground or was being proposed to George that he never, got made. The one that stood out that I didn't know about, that I don't think has ever been really talked about before, but apparently in 1999, which the actual film ended up getting made some years later. And it's not a it's not a movie that I really like or care about, but George apparently had reached out to the studio, seeing if there would be any interest in him writing a draft of this screenplay, and it was for Freddy versus Jason. And I was like, "What?" For one, the thought of George writing a screenplay for Freddy versus Jason was just like it blew my mind. I was like, "This would be what would this be?" But it also pointed out like this period in George's life in 1999, this period in time in his career where he was really struggling and was just desperate to get anything made, because I think the last thing on earth George would ever be interested in making would be Freddy versus Jason, because George always talked about for years and years and years, he'd say like, I have no interest in ever doing anything like a Friday the 13th or a Freddy Krueger movie or anything like that. That just wasn't his style. He wasn't a slasher guy in that type of way. It just never would interest him. But you could see, I mean, especially like I said, just looking through that folder of like, projects this thick, of everything that was either like television shows, movies, screenplays, everything that was either proposed to him or he was reaching out. Like, that was the thing about the Freddy versus Jason. It wasn't like they reached out to him to say, "Hey, do you want to take a pass at this screenplay?" It was George reaching out to the studio saying, "Hey, would you guys be interested if I took a stab at this?" And George was just desperate to get anything made at the time. He just wanted anything done. So it's crazy to me to just think that like George at that time period was just like, all right, fuck it, I'll do Freddy versus Jason. I just want to make something. Um, so yeah, that it was kind of like, damn, I hate that George was in a position at that point in his career where he was reaching out to do Freddy versus Jason. Of course, we looked at some Martin stuff. There's some great photos, a lot of behind the scenes photos and stuff that I'd never seen before, from the set of Martin. Some behind the scenes photos from Jack's wife that I'd never seen before that were really cool. Um, there was a letter here of the original proposal that George wrote to Richard Rubenstein, where George talked with AIP about making Dawn of the Dead in the early '70s as an all black cast, as like a blaxploitation type of film, and George was like, "Yeah, I'm not against that." And of course, that was when they suggested that O.J. Simpson play the lead character in it. So that was really interesting. That original letter's in there. There's a budget breakdown of Martin from 1975 when it was still titled Blood. Here's a letter from CBS rejecting the Crazies. I guess Richard Rubenstein in the mid 70s submitted the Crazies to CBS as maybe like, "Hey, would you like to show this, this movie on your channel sometime?" And CBS wrote back and said, "Nah, not really our thing." Yeah, there's just a ton of stuff in that archive. Letters from Donald Rubenstein. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. But the one thing that we came across that brought tears to both of our eyes. I mean, we were just like, and after that, I was just kind of like, I think I'm ready to go. Like, it's kind of heartbreaking. It was a real heartbreaking thing to read. Just I don't know what folder. I don't even remember what folder it was in, but we came across a letter from 2001 that George had written to Christine. Now, this is, like I said, this is a time period where George was struggling to get anything made. This is after Bruiser had probably come out and kind of, to no fanfare. It really didn't do much. But it was a letter from George to Christine, kind of saying, "Hey, I don't know if it was an anniversary thing or what, but it was just a letter to George, or letter from George to Christine, kind of saying along the lines of, I know I'm not easy to deal with. I know I'm in a bad mood. I'm grumpy most of the time. I'm miserable and all this, and it's not easy on you, and it's not easy on the kids. But I just want you to know that, I'm desperately trying to save my career, type of thing, and I'm doing this for you guys. Like, I love my films and I love my work, but I'll never love it more than I love you guys." And it was like this really heartbreaking, like, love letter that George wrote to Christine, because you could tell you hear any interviews with Christine now where she talks about that time period, she always mentions like what a difficult time it was for them, and yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the end of their relationship. It's when they started to drift apart a little, because they would end up splitting up a few years after. But you could just see you could just, in reading this letter, you got the vibe that George was just desperately trying to recapture the magic that his career once had when he was, Dawn of the Dead, Creep Show, Day of the Dead, all that time period where even late 80s, early 90s where George was constantly working on things, constantly had things going, and then by now everything had dried up, and he's reaching out trying to do Freddy versus Jason, just to do anything. And it was just this really heartbreaking letter of it was just broke. It was just a husband, pleading with his wife to, stick with me, like don't lose faith in me. Like I'm trying to prove it, not only to everybody else, but prove it to myself that I still got it, that I can still, do this. And I think at one point in the letter he says, and I'll just bear with me if nothing comes of this anytime soon. If nothing changes, then I will step back and live a more simple life. And it was just the most heartbreaking, sad letter, um, to read. I don't know, because growing up, George and Christine were like, you know, they were they were always together. They were always a thing in every like commentary, every documentary interview. I mean, Christine was always right there next to George, through it all, as his like assistant director and all that. And so like I remember when finding out that they had split up, it was like my own parents had split up. I was just like, holy shit. I didn't know how to take it. I was kind of heartbroken about it. So like I've been kind of on the kick of like wanting to go back around that time period and just kind of figure out like what happened, why, what happened there. And it's just it really humanizes George as a guy that I always looked up to. But it reminds you that he was just as human as all of us, just as human as the rest of us. We all have our issues, whether it's for relationships or careers or as parents. We all have our struggles. Yeah, it's rough. It's just a reminder that they're people too, I guess. But